Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you to Upstate Forever for having me. And I hope you all got some caffeine, because we're going to have some fun at the beginning, and then we're going to get some technical zoning stuff at the end. So caffeine always helps for that last part. So when I first got married, my husband and I moved to Brooklyn, New York, and we lived in a 550 square foot apartment in an 8-plex. About 18 months after that, we were able to afford to buy another 500 square foot, 50 square foot apartment in the 8-plex next door. We joked, are we going to move our furniture up and over or down and back up next door? 18 months after that, we timed it just right, and we were actually able to sell that unit, 550 square foot unit in that 8-plex, and made enough money to fund a cross-country summer research project for my husband to start his graduate work as we moved to California. When we moved to California and he was in grad school and I was working, we lived in another 8-plex, 550 square foot apartment, worked for us, right? And then when he finished grad school and was able to start a company, we finally were able to buy our home where we live today. It's a detached single-family home in a walkable neighborhood in Berkeley. Right next door to us is a duplex, and in that duplex, there's two grandparents, husband and wife, live in one unit, and in the other unit, their son, his wife, and their two grandchildren live. After we had owned our house for a few years, we actually bought another duplex about 2 blocks from our house. And we used that as income property for us, so we rented out one unit. My sister, who is a school teacher, lived in the second unit. And downstairs there was an illegal unit where my parents, my in-laws, stayed when they came to town to visit my kids, their grandchildren. We eventually sold that duplex so that my sister could get out her equity in that to put a down payment on her first home that she and her husband bought. These are all of the different places, types of places that have made my life possible just in the past 20 years, right? And these are the types of places that people are looking for at different stages in their life. My favorite story is that my son's kindergarten school teacher lives in a triplex, 3 units in one building, within walking distance from my house and from the school. So she's a kindergarten teacher. Her husband is my daughter's middle school PE teacher, 2 public school teachers, and they have 2 kids, 2 little kids. They live in one unit. In the unit next door, her brother and his wife and their 2 kids live. And in the third unit, her mother and father live. And her mother is also a kindergarten teacher at my son's school. 3 public school teachers, 3 families in a 2-story triplex in a walkable neighborhood. These are the places that make our lives work, and they make our lives wonderful, and they contribute to all of our lives by having them. So this concept started to occur to us about 18 years ago. We were working in a small town in Isla Vista, California. It's a 1-mile square town that had no possibility to grow. It was bounded by the ocean on one side, university on the second side, protected natural open space on the third side, and a single-family neighborhood to the fourth side that absolutely refused to grow at all. So they were forced to stay within their bounds. But their downtown, their little Main Street, was struggling, and they were trying to figure out what to do. So we had a community workshop. We were there for about a week, and we were talking with the community, and we realized that in order for their walkable neighborhood to work, they had to have enough people living within walking distance of those businesses to make the businesses viable. And they didn't have that. They didn't have enough people within walking distance. So they needed to find a way to bring in more housing to support their local businesses to get the Main Street businesses they wanted. So we started talking to them about that, and I said, okay, well, we can understand the need for more housing, but whatever you do, we are not willing to go above 12 units per acre. Okay, why 12 units per acre? Just 12 units per acre is all we can handle. We just don't want it to be density. We don't want Manhattan in our town. 12 units per acre. We're like, well, that is really unusual, because I've never, most people they might say I don't want density, but 12 units per acre, really? Where'd that come from? So we said, you know what, let's go on a walk. Let's just go walk around your town and see what you've got. So we were walking around and we passed by this building. And they're like, oh, we love this building. Can we build more of this? We love this building. It's wonderful. It's 2 stories. It's right in with our neighborhood. Everybody loves it. It's great courtyard, it's beautiful to walk by, love it. So we're like, okay, great, we can absolutely do that. Let's build more of this in your neighborhood. So we went back, finished our walking tour, and my husband went back and snuck around back and started doing some calculations. He went and counted utility boxes, counted mailboxes, tried to figure out how many units were in this building. Did a little math. 46 dwelling units per acre. Almost 4 times what they had said was their absolute maximum. And we realized there was this disconnect between what people think of when you say the word density and what density can actually look like. So let's talk about walkable cities for a little bit. Walkable cities around the country are growing. Many places are realizing the value of walkable cities. They're realizing that they're important for our physical health. People don't have time to exercise anymore. You have to build the exercise into their daily life, right? It's important for our social health. The social networks that we build when we live in a walkable community, when we see each other on a day-to-day basis, are really important for our mental health. It's important for land stewardship to take care of the land resources that we have and make sure we're protecting rural areas, protecting our farmland, protecting our open space, and building, quite frankly, more densely within the areas where we're building housing and commercial areas. And it's important for fiscal responsibility. These walkable areas across our country are thriving economically. Right? They're the most thriving areas in our country today. And it's also responsible fiscally for infrastructure costs. More and more studies are showing that the cost of infrastructure cannot be supported by detached single family, by low density, right? Those low density neighbors are not fiscally supporting themselves. They are being supported by the more dense neighborhoods in town. There's already a 20 to 35% gap. John talked about this quite a bit this morning. 20 to 35% gap between the demand for walkable living and the supply that we have available in this country. By 2025, 75 to 85% of households in this country will be households without children. And if you think about housing as a product, the product of the detached single-family home was designed for families with children. That's the product matchup. Right? Less than 25% of our population will be families with children in less than 10 years. Already, there's a 3 million unit shortage of attached lot attached housing units. And all of this demand for walkability, all of this lack of supply in walkable places is a direct factor in our affordability issues, in our gentrification issues, right? These are pushing people out. For the last 100 years, all of the 20th century, people that could moved out of the cities, right? And left the people that couldn't in the cities. Right? And now in the 21st century, the exact opposite is happening. Everybody wants to live in walkable places. They're realizing the value of walkable places. So it's putting immense pressure on walkable places, but we have not been building walkable places for the past century. That's a big problem. Home.1 is a great resource about the housing crisis that our country is facing, and some of the statistics are quite astounding. Over 10,000 baby boomers will retire every day for the next 15 years. And over half of them have no retirement savings. They're living completely on Social Security. Social Security right now is $13.41 per unit. If you spend even half of that on rent, $650 for rent, there is not a single place left in this country that you can afford to live. Not one. The realtors across the country are talking about this too. National Realtors magazines, 60% of neighborhoods, 60% of people in their studies favor neighborhoods that are walkable. Over 56% of millennials and 46% of baby boomers want to live in more walkable neighborhoods. That's the American Planning Association study. Commercial real estate. Commercial office tenants are now preferring walkable areas by a margin of 4 to 1. Guess why? Because that's where their employees want to live, right? The offices follow their employees, and employees want to live in walkable places. And some of the studies from Realtor.com of homes that will be in demand for millennials, they're wanting, the 59% are looking essentially for missing middle housing. Right now that looks like condos, townhomes, multifamily homes. And baby boomers, 27% of them are looking for that. But here is a major disconnect that's happening. A lot of people are talking about the demand for walkable living. You see it in a lot of publications across the country. But when they interpret that as city living. They interpret that as people wanting to live here or here. And that's what people are, and that's what is getting built, right? More apartments. But the reality is a lot of people actually want to live in places like this, right? And this. This is what they mean when they want to live in a walkable neighborhood, right? But we're not building that. We're not building that anymore. This is what the market's delivering. 2 products. Small lot, detached single family homes at the top left, and apartments and mid-rise and buildings. 3rd unit, and townhomes. And there is a lot of development of townhomes, right? But really 3 products for our incredibly diverse society. All different ages, all different household types, all different interests. We have 3 housing products on our market. Or worse yet, they're building this. Right? I'm sure you have a few of these in town. Okay. So, what is missing middle housing? Missing middle housing are house-scale buildings with multiple units and walkable neighborhoods. Simple as that. House-scale buildings, multiple units, and walkable neighborhoods. It is different than middle-income housing. Right? The second slide that I showed you, where we went on the walking tour and people were scared of 12 units per acre. That is where the concept of missing middle came from, is we realized that all of our historic neighborhoods had these types of houses in them that fit beautifully with the look and feel of the neighborhood living, right? And so when people say they want to live in a neighborhood, we realized that a lot of the historic neighborhoods that people love were not detached single-family home neighborhoods. They were actually mixed neighborhoods that had detached single-family homes, they had duplexes, they had triplexes, they had bungalow courts, and all of these different types mixed in. But even professional planners will walk around those neighborhoods and say, oh, this is a detached single-family home neighborhood, and they'll zone it. We've had arguments with people doing the general plan before we did zoning plan, and the professional planner will say, this is a single-family neighborhood, and we'll say, no, it's not, because they can't tell the difference, right? They look like what everyone would describe as a detached single-family neighborhood, but they're actually full of mixed housing types, building types. But a lot of the barriers to getting housing built, to getting density built in our country, is because people don't want Manhattan in their backyard, right? You hear it all the time, right? So the form and scale of these buildings is a critical part of what we're talking about when we talk about missing middle housing, because this is a way to build more density, to build more housing within existing neighborhoods, right? That's different than middle income housing. Middle income housing is housing that's attainable for people with middle incomes, for people that make too much to qualify for affordable housing, but don't make enough to be able to pay for market rate, right? Middle income, and we've heard a lot about that. Now, it turns out missing middle housing is a great solution for middle income housing. But I do want to point out there's a difference, because a lot of this is about the pushback about building density in neighborhoods, and we needed to find solutions to say, no, we actually can add more housing in these existing neighborhoods, we can densify these neighborhoods, and it will still look and feel like the neighborhood that you all want to live in. So here's some examples. Denver, Colorado. Norman, Oklahoma. Atlanta. New Orleans. All over the country. Every neighborhood built before 1940 in this country has examples of this. Everywhere we go. I did a little Google search last night here in Greenville, and I could look at the pattern, and second stop, I found a duplex on a corner here. It was at every neighborhood in the country built before 1940. Style's a little different. Every area in the country has its own little flair. New Orleans is a fun example of that, right? But the types are the same. So these are the types that we've identified. Every region has their own names for them. There's a few variations, but they're essentially the same. Side-by-side duplex, 2 units, one next to the other. A stacked duplex, 1 unit on top of the other. Oops. Bungalow court, this is my favorite. I want to skip this one. A little bungalow court. This is the dream of modern parents. I live here, and my babysitter is right. I don't want a big yard to take care of. I do not want a big house to clean. I do not want a yard to mow. I want people to help hang out and watch my kids. Carriage houses, these are called granny flats. The technical term is the accessory dwelling unit. Fourplexes, this is a great example. So this looks and feels, could be a single family home in many neighborhoods across the country. Right? This is an example in Dallas, Texas, and there's 4 units in this building. The building right next to it in the yellow brick looks exactly the same from the outside, except that it has yellow brick rather than red. That building actually has 8 units in it, right? Same scale, same form, as a detached single family home can house 1 family, can house 4 families, can house 8 families. Small multiplexes, we usually consider this about 6 to 8 units. Townhouses you're familiar with. Live-work units, this is an example of it's a single owner. The whole building is a single owner, but the ground floor is a flex space. So they could use it for their office or for a small shop, or when they have teenagers, they can make it big, the game room and the big family space. Just replaced the batteries, I promise. The courtyard apartment buildings I talked about earlier. Mansion apartments, this is a missing middle housing type that we designed in outside of Omaha, Nebraska. It has some wonderful old mansion neighborhoods there. And we designed this one and it actually has 7 units in it. So what are the characteristics of missing middle housing? Number 1, they're in a walkable context. So when we talk about a walkable context, we don't mean that you can go for an evening stroll. That's wonderful and you can do that, right? But if that's your option, I know you have the wonderful Swamp River Trail here. Swamp Rabbit Trail here. Sorry. And that's amazing, but if that's all you can walk to, that's not actually walkable living. Right? Walkable living means being able to walk to meet your daily needs. You can walk your kids to school, you can walk to the market to buy some milk, right? That's what walkable means. So it means having amenities close by. Often, just a small market or a small coffee shop can get this started. And that it's safe and comfortable to walk. There are lots of people in this country that are walking and it is not safe and it is not comfortable, right? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about areas where it's safe and comfortable and a reasonable solution to be able to walk in the neighborhoods. These are smaller units and people are willing, as John was mentioning, plenty of people are willing to live in smaller units, and I think that's a big difference. When we talk in communities, a lot of the baby boomers don't want to build these products because they're like, I would never live there. But the reality is there are lots of people now that would live there. And increasingly a lot of baby boomers that are saying they're happy to live there too. It doesn't necessarily mean small. The tiny house movement is a different movement. It's important for different reasons. But they're usually, 350 square feet, and we're usually talking about 750 to 1,000 square feet units. Lower perceived density. This is the crux of the issue that I was talking about, right? We are talking about building more units within the look and feel of a small, walkable neighborhood. Because here's the reality. When you start talking about adding density, we call it the D word. This is what people think you're going to build. Because guess what? This is what we did build. This is exactly what happened the last time we tried this in the 70s. Right? And this is what they're scared of. This is what we're building now. And this is really important. This is important to build along our corridors. It's an important part of the housing solution. But this is not what they want in their backyard. Right? This is what they're scared is going to happen. So you have to find the right places for this, and then missing middle housing is a solution that you can add to your toolbox to build into the neighborhoods. And this is why you never start a conversation with the word density. Because density can look like this, right? And density can look like this, and density can look like this. They're well-designed units. Smaller units mean they have to be better designed, right? We have to be careful about that. And that's something we have learned from the tiny house movement. The details in those tiny houses are incredible, beautifully, beautifully designed, These are some units that we built. I'll talk more about them outside Salt Lake City. And how you outfit the units. One of the great things about missing middle housing is you actually, let's say you have a fourplex, you can actually outfit 2 of the units for the millennials that are going to move in, that are getting their first apartment and are just trying to afford rent with maybe lower end appliances, lower finishes, not the granite countertops, right? But you can outfit the other 2 units for the baby boomers, the people that are ready to retire and can afford those appliances, right? My parents live in Charlottesville, and they've owned single-family homes. They've moved around the country a lot, detached single-family homes everywhere they've lived, and they got tired of it. They're tired of taking care of the house. They're tired of taking care of the yard. We don't come visit often enough to make it worth them staying there. They sold their house, and they said, we don't want another one. Their only other option was to live in a crappy apartment building, right, behind a strip mall. There was no place else for them to live with crappy appliances. My mom's complaining about her starter stove that she's got to put up with, right? I want to talk a little bit about parking. I'll make it brief. These are places with fewer on-street parking spaces. They are tied to walkable neighborhoods, and that means we're giving people choices to live in walkable neighborhoods, but it means we have to use that land for our housing rather than for our cars. Right? And here's the affordability issue. This was a study done by Fragnesi and Associates. And if you look, right, if the city only required 1 parking space per unit, then they could rent that apartment for $993 a unit. But if the city required them to build 2 parking spaces for that unit, the rents went up by over $400 a month, right? So you're forcing those people to pay for that parking space, whether they want it or not, right? And the reality is this is about providing choices. If they want a place with 2 parking spaces, there are plenty of places everywhere in this country that they can rent with 2 parking spaces. But a lot of people don't want those parking spaces, and we shouldn't tie the cost of their housing to the cost of their parking. Right, so this is an example where the community was okay with requiring less parking, so they lowered the parking requirements in their zoning code. All of the streets in the neighborhood had on-street parking, which is usually important in a walkable neighborhood. I can talk for hours about walkable neighborhoods, so I'll stop there. The developers and the builders were okay. They knew that they could rent or sell the units without the parking. They clustered some parking in the back, right, in Mesa, Arizona. This was a win-win for the community and for the builders. But it's about providing these choices. This is simple construction, so it's affordable by design. It's affordable by design for a lot of reasons. So when we hear people talk about capital A, affordable housing, when we hear people talk about how do we make housing more affordable, you hear 2 solutions. Number 1, we need to build more subsidized housing, right? Number 2, it's a supply and demand issue. The reason prices are so high is because we don't have enough housing, so we just need to build more housing, the prices will come down. You hear people arguing back and forth about that. I personally believe both are true. We need both of those solutions, right? But we need more solutions than that, right? And missing middle housing sits right in the middle, and then it's a market rate solution, right? But it brings in housing products at a lower cost point. And there's lots of reasons for that. You are building more density, so for the same piece of land, you're getting more units on it. So the cost of the land per unit is lower. You're building with stick-built construction. You don't have the cost of podium-built construction, so it costs less to build. You're not including the parking in it, so that lowers your land cost again. And the units are smaller. Flat out, they're spending less money because they're buying less square footage or they're renting less square footage. Lots of reasons that actually bring the rental or the purchase price down. So this is an example. John was a great lead-in. I couldn't have paid for a better introductory, or speaker before me. This is the project that we worked with the developer outside Salt Lake City for, and their problem was in Salt Lake City they could not build and sell a townhouse for less than $230,000. Right? So you heard John talk about a lot of people have moved to townhouses as a solution to this problem. Right? Well, a lot of communities are already looking up the barrier that even townhouses are too expensive. They're building townhouses and they still can't sell them at a price point that people can afford. So they were trying to figure this problem out. How do we sell something for less than $230,000? So we worked with them and we worked on this block, we designed this block. And essentially, instead of putting an alley through the middle of the block, we put a pedestrian walkway through the middle of the block and we put units along it. And these are essentially townhouse units, but we turned them on their side so that they're not so deep, so they would fit in the middle of the block. Right? They sold for $180,000 to $220,000, right? The lowest product that anybody could buy on the market. Their number 1 buyer, single professional women. And the kicker, and I will show this to you again because it's such a win-win, the kicker was of all of the products in the area, detached single-family homes, townhouses, these units, second highest price per square foot for the developer. Second highest win in the entire area for the return on their investment. And it creates community, and I can't emphasize this enough. People are looking for walkable neighborhoods because they're looking for communities. They're looking for connection. They're starving for connection, and that's what they're buying. They're trading the amenity of space, the amenity of a big backyard, and the amenity of a big house. They're trading that for the amenity of place, of community, of connection. These are the types of places that they're looking for, right? At all age levels, all different family types, these are the types of places that are in demand. And they're talking about the Golden Girls generation is coming back, right? So, now we're gonna start getting a little more technical. How do you make this happen? So the yellow types are the missing middle housing types, and in this diagram, the white are detached single family homes. So they can fit on the, this one. What we generally talk about is they fit beautifully just in detached single family neighborhoods. They just sprinkle them throughout, and all of the historic neighborhoods. If you doubt it, I'm sure there's ones here in town. Go for a walking tour. Take your neighbors out for a walking tour. You'll walk along and start counting mailboxes. Look for the house numbers on the building, and you'll realize, oh my goodness, that's a duplex. Holy cow, there's 4 mailboxes on that. There's 4 families living in that. You won't be able to tell the difference until you start noticing those details. Also, when you have blocks where maybe one street is a little bit busier than the other streets, they work great. You just start putting the 4plexes and the small multiplexes along some of those busier streets, right? Those often are great solutions. And they're a fantastic solution for transitioning between kind of more mid-rise commercial areas into the detached single-family homes. So this is an example that a drawing we did in Austin, Texas, and it shows how over just a single block depth, you have a busy corridor with mixed-use buildings along the corridor. You transition along an alley from the lower end of those mixed-use buildings to the larger missing middle housing units on the back of the block, and then but those are already bringing the height down from 4 stories down to 2.5 stories, and then across the street from that are detached single-family homes. Same thing in redeveloping old mall sites or grayfield sites that you're looking at. You can do the same sort of transition. This is really important, and I heard this mentioned a couple of times this morning in various speakers, and I want to talk about this. People are looking for the amenity of place. They're looking for the amenity of community, and that means mixed communities, mixed housing types, mixed income levels, mixed ages. And if you build an entire block of one product type, whatever it is, one block of detached single-family homes, one block of townhouses, one block of tiny homes, right? You are not going to get the diversity in your neighborhood, right? All of these different types are important solutions, but we need to be building places and finding ways to enable all of these different types mixed in with those places. So the challenge is efficiencies, right? It gets expensive. If you have to build every different building a little bit differently, it gets expensive, right? But if you can build 2 of the same building, it's more efficient. So developers are coming to us saying, well, yes, but my cost goes up if I don't get those efficiencies, so what do we do? So this is the project in Salt Lake City I showed you. And so what we did is we looked at the entire block and we said, okay, what we want is a whole bunch of different housing types on there to make it a really interesting and complete community. And what you want and what we want for price is efficiencies. So we did this back and forth, where we would design a different mix of different housing types, and they would run the numbers to see kind of where they could get the efficiencies. And in this case, we came up with 9 different types. So 9 different types we were comfortable was enough to make a really kind of complete, kind of provide a lot of different options for people in the same neighborhood, and they could get the efficiencies that they could get the price points that they wanted. But that's really important to consider. And multi-generational housing. A lot of people are living multi-generationally these days. And so thinking about the ways that you can have a unit on the front, there's a unit here, it's the kind of the typical detached single-family home, the granny flat studio above the garage on the back, and then a unit connecting, right? Makes a beautiful space, and you have all sorts of different people living in that. we can live in the house, in the family now and have my parents move in, and then when my parents pass on and our kids start having grandkids, they can take over the house and we can move into the back unit. There's lots of us moving around in him, but every family still gets some private space, right? So, why is it missing? This is really hard, if not impossible, to build across our country. So, our zoning. It's really hard to find sites where the zoning allows this type, and I'll get more into that in a few minutes. But you can't, the zoning doesn't allow this to get built in most places. Financing is really hard. To do financing, John mentioned, they come to him to okay that this is worth doing. Well, part of what you do is you go look and see, well, has anything else like this sold? We haven't been building it, so no, nothing else like this has sold, right? We don't have it's hard to get financing for it. The NIMBYs, and I meant to take this off, I really don't like labels, and I think labels are a real problem. These are people that are concerned about change in their neighborhood, and we have to honor that concern. And this is how we help them realize that we have to provide housing for the people in our community, and we can do that in a way that still provides them the kind of neighborhood they want to live in. But that resistance causes a lot of problem, and it's a lot of the reason why the zoning hasn't changed, and we haven't gotten this to allow. So it is a challenge. The cost of land is increasingly expensive, untested markets, and building at an efficient scale. So these are the challenges, but we can do it. I know we can do it. So we're going to build an army of people that are doing this. So back to the zoning. Missing middle housing is actually illegal in most cities. So this is an apartment building that is beloved in the community. And these are the types of places that we hear over and over and over again. These apartments actually never go on the market because the people who live in them love them. And if they ever decide to move, they make sure that the next person is somebody that they love, a friend or a family member. They make sure to pass that apartment on to somebody that they know rather than having it on the open market because it's such a great place to live. Our employees are actually doing this now. Every time an employee leaves to go to grad school, they pass their apartment on to somebody else in our office, right? It's the only way, I mean, we're really struggling. It's expensive to live where we live, right? But it's against the zoning in some pretty basic ways. Straight up, most residential areas are zoned, or many of them are zoned single-family zones, right? By definition, this is not single-family. Straight up, not allowed. 2, the setbacks. It's not set back from the street. 3, has 0 parking, none whatsoever, yet completely viable and always full, right? Our zoning, let's see. The reality is that we actually never learned how to regulate for non-single family buildings, right? Zoning started in the 20s, but it really took off in the 40s, right? And which is the same time in planning, we were starting to separate land uses. We were saying, we have these great, everyone's got a car now, right? So everyone can live in one neighborhood, and they can jump in their car and they can drive to work, right? And we're gonna keep industry over in another area. We're separating uses, right? That's when zoning started. So our zoning, when we started writing zoning for the first time, we were writing zoning to separate uses. And so every zone that you see has use as the basis of it. This is a R1 zone, residential 1 zone, an R3 zone, residential 3 zone. This is a C2 zone, a commercial zone. Use is the basis of our zones, and every zone has a basic separate use, right? And that's the basis of our entire zoning system in this country. We're learning more, some people already knew this, but we're learning more about there's other nefarious uses also, right? Multifamily and single-family zones were actually used to prevent people of color from living in the same neighborhoods as white people. And this is what one of our presidents actually said that he promoted. Go out and write zoning for your community and make sure you have single-family zones and you have multifamily zones. And here's why. Because he knew that families of color could not get a mortgage for a detached single-family home. So if the entire neighborhood was detached single-family homes, then he knew that families of color could not live there because they could not get a mortgage, right? One of many, many reasons that racism is put into our system, the mortgage, the redlining, but multifamily and single-family zones has a racist history in our country, and I think it's really important to point that out to our communities, that is a part of our history and a part of our zoning system. It's built into our zoning system. It's something we really need to be thoughtful about. So we have multifamily zones. Guess what? This is what they look like. Anybody want to live here? Is this your first choice? You could live walking distance to downtown or live here. Right, our multifamily zones were regulated to along major corridors, 2 major corridors. This is walking distance to nowhere, right? Not really a lot of fun to live in. Not really very interesting design-wise. Has a pool. I could go to the pool. My kids would love the pool, right? Not a lot, right? Not a lot good location-wise, not a lot good design-wise for what's happening with our multifamily. And the other problem with our zoning is that our zoning allows this, and it prevents all those other types that I've been talking about. So I'm going to go into some detail about that. And actually, I'll tell you a little bit why. If you think about, I'll tell you why in a little bit. But the reality is our zoning is a major problem. Our zoning is requiring stuff that we don't want anymore. It's preventing the stuff that we do want. It's the whole system is based on separation of use, which does not create great places, and we need to change that. So one of the things we encourage you to start with is just take a closer look at your zoning code. Do some little studies about what's possible, what is it encouraging, what is it enabling. And what you'll typically find is that your zoning code is actually forcing issues on your design that you've never intended, right? It's forcing you to put parking on the front of the house rather than being able to tuck it behind the house for various reasons. There's all sorts of unintended consequences of our zoning that you don't know about until you sit down and actually try to design something. So we do that in a lot of communities around the country. We actually go out and test their zoning. And this is an example that we did in a small town, small walkable town. So there was a 50 by 150 lot that was in that town available. And according to their zoning code, they could build this. This was allowed by right with their zoning code. With a variance on it, this was allowed by their comprehensive plan, so they could easily get a variance to build this. But they couldn't build this, right? Which would you rather have in your neighborhood? So what we typically find if we look at zoning codes is that the minimum lot sizes are too big. Basically, it requires too large of a lot size to fit multiple units on it, right? So getting rid of minimum lot sizes is important. The densities aren't high enough, right? The densities are designed for single-family homes. Various unintended consequences lead to discouraging small units, which I'll talk a little bit more about, and the parking is too high. So if I want to build that example in Dallas, and instead of building a single-family home, I want to build a fourplex. Most residential parking requirements require 2 parking spaces per unit. So I just went from needing 2 parking spaces to needing 8 parking spaces. These lots are not big enough to build 8 parking spaces on them, right? So what do you do about zoning? So remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to prevent what's in the top left, and we're trying to get what's in the bottom right. So one of the things we recommend is actually putting building types straight into your zoning. Be really clear about it and put it in. And the reason is because each of these types are appropriate in different places and work well in different places. So here, if you look at it, each of the types has different minimum lot width and depth, right? Because some of the types, you don't want a townhouse on a lot that's too wide, right? But you don't want to put one of those cottage courts on a lot that's too narrow. Right? So they actually have different design aspects to them. Here, the top example is the bungalow court that I was talking about, and the bottom one is a duplex. And the height here is different, right? The bungalow court on the top, if we allow 2.5 stories, those are going to be too big. It's too bulky for the neighborhood, right? So if those bungalows were all 2.5 stories on that one lot, it would overpower the neighborhood. The units in the back would be 2 stories overlooking the neighbor's backyards, right? That's not going to work in the neighborhood. So if you're going to do bungalow courts, they need to stay at 1 stories, right? That's really important. But if you do duplexes or fourplexes, 2.5 stories are perfectly reasonable in those neighborhoods. Other things like the open space, how you work open space. So most of the missing middle types, you're going to want to make sure that you have open space in the rear of the yard. In the bungalow court, the open space is in the center of the courtyard space. So all of these little details are really hard to regulate unless you actually call out building types in your code. Trying to frontage type. Frontage is another thing that's really important to regulate. The frontage is the way that your building talks to the public space, talks to the street, talks to the people on the street, right? So one of the things is it's actually really important to have a front door that faces the street. Right? How many buildings have you seen like this one on the left? Right? That building is not talking to the people on the street. Right? It's not having a conversation. It's actually turning its back to the people on the street. That's what it's doing, right? And if we're talking about creating walkable neighborhoods, these details matter. That is not a comfortable building to walk next to. This one is, right? So where you put the front door matters. We're seeing this happen all over the place. People are taking townhomes that are now allowed in their code, they're turning them on the side, they're putting a really dark alley along it, not even an alley, it's just a walkway to get to the buildings, right? This is not good environmental design. This is not creating community. Right? This is not creating good walkable places. So you have to be careful about how you regulate this. One of the things that I want to talk about is part of the reason that our conventional zoning codes don't work. And that's because our conventional zoning codes, number one, they're based on use to begin with. But number two, they kind of basically carve out everything else that you need and leave whatever's left over for the building. So they say, make sure you leave this much space for parking. Make sure you leave this much open space, right? You know, all of these other regulations. Make sure that your building is set back at least this far from the sidewalk, but you know, kind of anywhere back there can go. And whatever you've got left after they carve out all these spaces, whatever they kind of blob left in the middle, you can kind of squeeze your building in there somehow. In addition, they're not prescriptive. What they say is, as I mentioned, you can build your building at least the setback, at least this far back from the sidewalk, but it can go here or here or here or here. Density, they have a density limit, but you can build anywhere in that range of density that's allowed. FAR, how many people you know what FAR is? I am a professional, and I still struggle with the concept of FAR. I am a zoning professional, and I struggle with the concept of FAR. FAR is the floor area ratio, and it's basically the amount of floor space you can have in ratio to the amount of property that you own. So an FAR of 1 means that you can build a one-story building that fills the entire lot. Right? An FAR of 1 also means, however, that you can build a building that covers a quarter of the lot that's 4 stories tall. Because you have the same floor area, right? Is there any predictability in that? If a developer goes in and designs something with that FAR, with that density, with that setback, is there any way the neighborhood is going to be able to predict what's going to get designed for that site? There is no way. So what does the neighborhood say? They say, okay, you go design it according to our zoning code, and then you come back to our design review committee so we can check and make sure that we like what you designed. So the developer goes out, they read the zoning code, they go out, they hire an architect, hire an engineer, they do a design, they take it back to the community. The community says, no, we do not like that. Take it back. Right? So now the developer goes back to the architect, has the building redesigned. What's happened to the cost of those units? It's just gone up because we just had to pay the architect again. Right? Back and forth, right? So that's increasing the cost of housing. It's creating a really negative relationship between the community and the developer who's designing the building, building buildings in the community, right? And then, here's the other side note. In many communities, they do that back and forth, and they never get an approval, right? So guess what's going to happen to the next building they build? That loss of all that money is now going into the next building. They have to make up that money somehow, right? This is how our process leads to the high cost of housing. This entitlement process is crazy. What we recommend, and in reforming zoning and in writing zoning for walkable communities, is a proactive process. We say the community needs to go out there, and the community needs to decide what you want. You need to look at your comp plan and make some decisions. You need to write your zoning to implement those decisions, and you need to be prescriptive about it. You need to say that the building needs to go here, right? And in every walkable community you have, you'll notice that most of the buildings line up. If it's downtown, they line up at the edge of the sidewalk. If it's in the walkable neighborhoods, they line up about 10 feet back, 15 feet back to have a small front yard, but most of the buildings line up. Tell them that's where they get to put the building. Right? Tell them how high you want it, between 2 and 3 stories. Tell them how wide you want it. Do you want side yard? Do you not want side yard? You tell them how deep you want it, because you want to make sure that you protect your backyard space, right? Because that backyard open space, the most dense cities in the world have backyard open space. Brooklyn, London, Amsterdam, they all have backyard space because that backyard space is important. And then let them go at it. Just make sure the front door faces the street. Right? Then the developer can say, okay, the community has said this is what we want. Yeah, I'll build that. That sounds great. They go design it, right? The community comes back and the community says, well, those are the things we asked for, so yeah, that's great. And it gets to the point where you actually have what's called a by right process, where the community says, if you meet these needs, then you get your entitlements right off. Number one, it means they don't have to go through the design review process, it's faster. Number two, it means that there's less risk. They go in and there's no risk involved in whether or not they're gonna get their entitlements. They know if they meet your needs, then they're gonna get them, right? It's also a great relationship. The community has said, we want this built, and the developer says, we're gonna build it for you. Great relationships between the community and the building, right? This is what we can do. And this is what we can do if we write our zoning differently and be prescriptive about our zoning. We call this type of zoning form-based codes because it prioritizes the form of the building over the use of the building. We still regulate use. Any zoning code out there is going to regulate all of these things, but it's about what you're prioritizing. So we're prioritizing the types of places. Our zone is a downtown zone, or it's a neighborhood adjacent to downtown zone. Right? That's what our zones are called. And then all of the regulations in them are supporting that type of place that we're building. So, what are some options? What can you do if you're interested in doing this? First thing you can do is just remove barriers in your current zoning, right? You can take density out if that's preventing it. You can allow multifamily in your single-family zones. You can lower your parking regulations, first thing. In any of your walkable neighborhoods, lower your parking requirements. The problem is that the existing system is built on years and years of a wrong system with fixes and fixes and fixes, right? So it can be a little dangerous too, and you have to be a little bit careful about that. So if you're going to do this, consider doing it in pilot areas. A lot of communities are starting with an ADU ordinance that just says, at the very start, you're allowed to build a second unit. And it can be an attached unit or it can be a detached unit, but you're allowed to build a second unit. And they start. And then they say, okay, well, people are happy about this, so now we're going to allow duplexes. Well, now we're going to allow people like that. Well, now we're going to allow fourplexes on the floor. And they start to get people comfortable with the idea of what this is going to allow. And you do that in pilot project areas. So that's possible, and often with political will, that's all you can get. Take it and run with it. But just recognize that you need to be a little careful. Things you want to look at are low lot coverage, regulating low lot coverage, so making sure, as I mentioned, you're protecting the space that you need to protect. Removing density and unit limits, being careful with the minimum lot size. That's the other big one that gets people is minimum lot sizes. And usually you can get rid of that one pretty easily. You don't really need minimum lot sizes. Other barriers to remove, looking at things. This is a project in that small walkable town that we did the scenarios. And in this town, every unit they built had a $35,000 impact fee, right? So if this developer was looking at this and said, I want to build 2 units in that and 1 unit, my price just went up $35,000 out of pocket, right, just to build a second unit. Turns out the utility hookup fee was $45,000 a unit, right? So now developers saying, forget that, I'm just going to build a big single-family home. Biggest one I can build, highest price I can get for it, rather than building 2 more affordable units, because it's going to cost her $80,000 out of pocket to do that. So you have to look at all of those different things. Second thing you can do is create a new zone. So the project where we did the study of these are the things that are allowed and this is the one that's not allowed. We actually wrote just one zone for that neighborhood, and we created a new zone, created it from scratch, applied it to that neighborhood. So you get it right? The third option you can do, and we did this in the city of Cincinnati, and increasingly I am suggesting this as the best path to go, which is we actually created a set of zones. So they already had a zoning code. We created a second zoning code that wasn't mapped anymore. And it was a whole new form-based code, and we studied all the city, and we basically created a set of zones that we thought would work, through the city. We involved the public. It was mostly technical experts that really understand how zoning works. But we understood the different place types we were trying to get, and we created this kind of palette of zones. So we did all this kind of heavy lifting ahead of time. And then we went out and did community workshops. And we said, if your community is interested, we'll come out, we'll do a public process, we'll look at these zones, we'll tweak them for your particular neighborhood, we'll map them to your neighborhood, and you get to replace your old zoning with this new zoning. It can happen at whatever speed the neighborhood's interested, either really quickly or they can take their time, right? So you can do it at the speed of the neighborhood. But but you can actually roll it out fairly quickly throughout the neighborhoods. I'm not going to be done in 30 seconds. I'm trying my best. So I'm almost done. So that's a great way to do that. And in the end, it means that you only have two systems that your city administrators have to administer. You know, a lot of places will do priority development areas, and then they have one zoning code here, one zoning code here, one zoning code here. It's a lot to administer, so this creates a great way to administer. And when you're ready for it, you can update your full zoning code. Keep in mind that you want to make this, the developers that are developing this type of housing are small, local, incremental developers. These are not big professional development companies. So you need to make it easy for them. In fact, preferably, it's a small homeowner that's deciding that they want to actually turn their house into a fourplex, right? They're looking for rental income. So you want to write these regulations and set them up for success. Make sure they're transparent, they're clear, they're understandable, and that the process is affordable. And to hold the line out there for what's possible, you know, you always have to have a goal you head for. Make it a checklist. Make your zoning code. This is a zoning code we designed. Now, it's not the United States. We had to go to Africa to be able to build a zoning code that looks like this, right? But we did. In Gabon, on the west coast of Africa, we designed a zoning code for a region expanding there, and we made it out now a checklist. So these are the requirements. If you check all these off, you get to build, right? And it's had a huge success. So the comprehensive plan, and I want to take a minute to talk about this, and I know you have a lot to do today, but because I know you're launching on your comprehensive plan process, this is a project that we did for Beaufort County, South Carolina. And what we did, we actually did a zoning code for them that was it was one zoning code system that the county of Beaufort used, the city of Beaufort used, and the town of Port Royal used. So we studied the whole region as a region, we set a system up for them, and then all of those different jurisdictions then applied that system. This is where we started. Is the first thing we had to do is we had to study the area and study the region and look at all the different place types in this region and what we're going to create. This should have been done in their comp plan process, and that's why I bring it up. This is what they should have been doing in their comp plan process. What you should be looking at is the type of places that you want in your area and how those are going to support one another. It's your strategic plan. Where are we going to put our house? What kind of places are we going to put? How are we going to accommodate all of our housing needs? How are we going to accommodate our transportation needs? That's your strategic plan. And then for each of those place types, we looked at them in the different, the first row is Beaufort County, the second one is the town of Port Royal, the third is the city of Beaufort. Which places do they have in their towns and cities, right? And then once we came to agreement on that, then we started to put kind of descriptions around it. Well, what does housing look like in those place types? What does the activity mix look like in those? What does the transportation and connectivity look like in those places? Right? This should be the outcome of your comp plan. And I'll be honest, hardly anyone is doing it like this, but we have to start doing it like this, right? Your comp plan is your strategic plan, and your strategic plan has to talk about all of these things. Then you turn it over to technical experts and you say, make it happen. And don't pay them unless they make it happen, right? But at this point, your zoning code should prescribe this and make it happen. Right? Your transportation system should adhere to this. And anybody that's ever done a strategic plan knows what happens if whoever's responsible for implementing the details changes their mind and decides not to follow the strategic plan. What happens to the strategic plan? It falls apart, right? We as a community should be deciding strategically how are we going to tackle all of these problems as a unified community, right? And then everything that we do after that has to follow those agreements. We made an agreement as a community where we were going to do our housing, how we were going to do our housing, and we have to follow that. And everything that's built after that has to follow it or it falls apart. All of those agreements, all of those decisions fall apart. It is super important that that happens. So this is an example of how even in the most rural crossroads, walkable places matter, right? Because you're basically bringing activity, you're bringing commercial activity and housing together, and you're kind of building off of that. So whether it's a rural crossroads, a small village, a town, this could have been in Beaufort. This was actually for the county of Hawaii, which is also a very rural area. And so looking at how walkability affects even a kind of rural crossroads, that's really important. And in Memphis, we're doing this right now. So the city and county of Memphis is doing their comprehensive plan. And we're doing this exact strategy. So we've worked with the community to identify the various place types, and then the county staff, city county staff is going to be working with the community to have community workshops to kind of identify where those place types apply throughout the city and county. And, okay, so I'll see this. Some examples of where it's happening. This is a neighborhood outside of Omaha, Nebraska that is coming out of the ground as we speak. They're rushing to get the foundations in before the ground freezes. The entire neighborhood will be missing middle housing. Now, I don't generally promote this sort of thing because, as I mentioned earlier, we want a mix of different housing. This does have a mix of different housing in it. It's got a little main street. It won't have any detached single-family homes in it. But right now, this is so hard to build in this country that that this community was willing to make it happen. And so we're going to get some statistics and some data off of this so that we can actually have comps and proof of concept sort of thing. But they are really excited about having it in their community. Pocket neighborhoods, single-family homes around little neighborhood greens. The housing in Daybreak, and I'll mention again, lowest thing on the market, price on the market, second highest price per square foot. So how can you help? Take a look at your zoning. Recruit and Train Small Developers is a great organization called the Incremental Development Alliance, and they run developer boot camps. They'll come to town for 2 days, and they'll have a little boot camp to teach anybody in your community who wants to become a developer how to do it. Recruit local banks. Lending for these is hard too. So get your local banks involved so that you can get lending to build these. Prioritize it in your comprehensive plan. Update your zoning code and talk it up again. This is about people's fear of density. That's what this is about. And we talk to them about the different options that they have. Okay, and so with the time that I really, really don't have, I'm just going to tell you what we do. Maybe. So there is a website out there that we built, missingmiddlehousing.com. I really encourage you to go out there and use that to arm yourself with information and data about this, to talk to your community about it. We are an architecture and urban design firm out of Berkeley, California. We work all over the country, a little bit internationally, on walkable neighborhoods. And what we believe is that we believe in strong communities, and we believe that our expertise in the built form contributes to that conversation in how the built form impacts strong communities, right? And so the built form does have an impact on strong communities, and we help communities think about that. We do zoning reform. We do zoning code updates for communities across the country. And we do architecture. We actually work with developers to actually design and build these projects across the country. And we are actively recruiting. If you have developers in the community that are interested in trying to make this work, we would very much be interested in helping them because we are trying to get proof of concept on the ground to how to make this happen now. So remember, this is really about providing housing choices, having more options available for people for the choices that they're making at different price points, and in walkable neighborhoods.